Hi, I'm Nyesha McCauley, and you're watching AccessTV.org.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm John Mason, and welcome to another episode of Downtown with John Mason. My guest today is the Reverend Cornell Lewis, a community activist, longtime community activist in the community. My first question is for Cornell. Cornell, what do you have against white people?
Wow, that's a loaded question.
No,
I don't have anything. I don't have anything against white people.
I know you don't. But tell me what you've been doing. Like, I've known you since the early 90s, early 2000s, when you were active in Hartford. You were active in, confronting gang members about crime in the street, about what they were doing to the community. How has that changed for you? You moved out of the community. You moved to Bloomfield.
Yes.
What year was that?
I think it was 10 years ago.
Okay, but you're still active in causes and whatnot. And tell me what exactly you're doing these days. Better yet, let's go back to the early 90s.
Okay.
How has Hartford changed? You're still involved in Hartford. How has Hartford changed from the early 90s to 25 years later?
Well, I think Hartford has changed in a lot of ways. I think a lot of the people that live in Hartford understand that they need to come together in order to make some kind of systemic change. When I lived in Hartford in the early 90s and we were doing anti-violence, anti-drug work, people didn't have any idea of cohesiveness. But after we got rid of 20 Love and Los Solido in the community in the North End on Bellevue Street, then people started to come together and form groups and understand that they had to have a cohesive unit in order to make change.
Like, are you saying that you think gang activity is not as prevalent today, or is not as, people might dispute that.
Well, there's gang activity in Hartford, but it's not as audacious, I guess you would say, as it was in the 90s. Open-air drug markets, murders, all the time on the streets. I think that has changed a little bit.
10, 15, 20, even 20 years ago, there was more of a confronting that kind of crime. I don't see that as much. I don't see a person like yourself. And I remember one night where you actually stalked out or filmed drug activity at a convenience store from a nearby building, just to show authorities what was going on at this. There was a lot of that confrontation. I don't see that as much anymore. I don't know if it was just you doing it.
Well, yeah, it was part of my personality. I understood that in order to make people want to get rid of the drug dealers, that some things drastically had to be done. And so my method was confrontation, because I believe confrontation leads to change.
And my next question would be, how many times have you been beat up? Like, how many? No, I'm just kidding. But what
Let me go back to that. Once I was attacked by a drug dealer with a stick. He didn't understand that I was fighting in martial arts competitions 3 days a week. And at the time, I was a first-degree black belt. I'm a fourth-degree black belt in hand-to-hand combat now. And when he hit me, that was the only swing he got with the stick. Let's just say that by the grace of God, I put him down gently.
But were you fearful of that kind of activity, because your name was out there and it still is out there? Are you fearful of retaliation? Because not many people did what you did and continue doing today, as far as confronting people who are, could be considered dangerous.
Well, what you have to understand, Johnny, is this. I looked at what was happening in the community I lived in, and I made a choice. And the choice I made was to do something about it. Now, whether I was injured or killed was not the issue for me. I compartmentalized that aspect of it. What was important was making sure the community was safe, and that came from my theological training and also from reading history.
Well, let me stop you there. What's the theological training for that kind of method? What is it? Is it? And I know you recite Greek poetry at times and Greek philosophers, so don't do that.
Don't do that. Okay, it's too early in the morning.
What's the theology involved with that kind of almost if pushed comes to shove that you'd be willing to physically,
Well, when I went to theological school and we learned about the teachings of Jesus and the prophets and people like that, we understood that anytime you stand up against the powers that be, that something might happen to you or even to the people that you love. Mm-hmm. And so taking the scriptures as a foundation, I understood that when I confronted 20 Love and Los Solidos, that something might happen to me, but the main concern for me was not myself, mm-hmm. but for the people who were literally being harassed mm-hmm. by these gang members. And when one lady was raped 30 yards from my house on a June day, 5 p.m. in broad daylight, and nobody did anything, mm-hmm. that is when I asked myself, what would Jesus do? Mm-hmm. Would Jesus just go back in the house and say, nah, I don't have anything to do with mm-hmm. that? Mm-hmm. I said, no, Jesus would do something. Mm-hmm. But just because you get involved in a fight does not mean that you're going to escape, unharmed. Mm-hmm. In a fight, Johnny, and from being in martial arts competitions, everybody gets hit. Mm-hmm. And so when I went into this, I understood that I might take some kind of hit physically, and indeed 20 Love did put a contract on my life. Mm-hmm.
And that was in the 90s, at
yes.
the height of, mm-hmm. and what did that result in? I mean,
it resulted in people, when I started doing anti-violence, anti-drug stuff in the early 90s on Bellevue Street, other people who had wanted to do the same thing galvanized behind myself. So I looked around and I had dozens and dozens of people willing to help. So we organized them, put them in shifts. We paraded up and down Bellevue Street. We picketed the crack houses. Mm-hmm. We ran out all the customers who came from suburbia mm-hmm. into that neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And it showed people that if you come together, you could make some change. And after 8 weeks, we got rid of the drug dealers, and it was a beautiful thing because all of the people who had been traumatized by the drug dealers came out of their houses, set up tables the entire length of Bellevue mm-hmm. Street, and had a party. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the kids came out, and the people came out, and people cooked food, and we didn't ask people to do it. They just did it because they were glad. Go ahead.
Now, I'm glad you bring up that point, because part of your efforts were to actually go to the suburbs where the customers who came into the city and bought drugs, and you had some confrontations with people from the suburbs who mm-hmm. were arrested for buying drugs.
Yeah.
Tell me just briefly about that. Did you actually go to the home of people who were arrested for drugs and confront them with a bullhorn or posters or what did you say?
Well, here's what happened. We went to the police department and got the arrest records mm-hmm. of people who had been arrested in Nelton Court, a housing project in the North End, for buying drugs. There were 100 people. Mm-hmm. Out of 100, 85 came from the suburbs. Mm-hmm. So yes, we went to West Hartford, we went to Meriden, we went to Torrington. Mm-hmm. We had placards, we had spray painted sheets saying "Don't buy drugs" in Hartford.
But I mean, are you in front of the person's house,
well,
Jimmy Jones?
we walked up and down the street
of the person who bought drugs.
Yeah,
with their name on the poster.
No, not with their name on the poster.
Just don't buy drugs.
Don't buy drugs. But interestingly enough, the people who ran out of the houses and confronted us the loudest were the people whose names were on the list. Mm-hmm.
But why? So my question is, why not say, Jim Jones? We know you're in the house. Was there a legal problem to that?
No, in some cases we did do that.
Okay.
In some cases we did do that, but in many cases we didn't, because the people ran out of the house talking about, you need to go back to Hartford. And they were the very people whose names were on the list.
And what was the dialogue in that situation? Like, what are they? You need to go back to Hartford, and what do you respond with?
The first time we went to West Hartford and we did this, a boy 18 had purchased some marijuana laced with embalming fluid in Nelton Court. His mother had no idea it was him.
Mm-hmm.
We were marching up and down the street. The mother came out of the house and said, she called me a bald-headed Al Sharpton,
mm-hmm.
told me I needed to go back to Hartford. That's where the work was really needed.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a piece of paper close to my chest. I did not want her to see her son's name. Helen Ubinas, working for the Hartford Courant, said, "What's your name, ma'am?" And she said what her name was. And Helen said, "Well, I see so-and-so. Is that your son?" And the lady swooned. And she said, "That's my son." And Helen said, "Yeah, his name is right here." And the lady ran back in the house, and she was a little short lady. Her son was about 6'3", and she put her finger in his face. And so those kinds of things went on. But this lady, before she found out it was her son,
mm-hmm.
she told me I was wrong. I had no business coming out there, that all the evil existed in Hartford.
Mm-hmm.
And I differed with her because I explained to her and other people from suburbia, your dollars support a criminal enterprise, mm-hmm. just like the people from Hartford.
Why is that perception that Hartford is the bad guy, especially with white people in the suburbs? Why is it a racial thing? Is it just why is it it's Hartford's problem? Drugs are in Hartford and.
Well, it's a perception. It's a perception that people selling drugs in the urban setting, that's a form of evil. But see, if you're from suburbia and you come to Hartford or Chicago or wherever and you buy drugs, you're supporting a criminal enterprise. Mm-hmm. So what I tried to do was show the people that, hey, listen, what you're doing is just as wrong as what people are doing in Hartford.
By buying the drugs.
By selling and buying drugs in Hartford. People who buy and sell drugs, that's evil. But what you're doing when you come from Meriden or Torrington is just as wrong. And as a matter of fact, you have more dollars in suburbia, so therefore your share of the crime is greater. And that was hard for them to buy into mm-hmm. mentally. They had to make an ideological or theoretical shift in their thinking from the city being evil to suburbia being evil. And they couldn't do it. Mm-hmm. They could not do it because it had not been done before and nobody ever pointed the finger at them. Mm-hmm. And so it took a while for that to sink in, but finally it did.
Do you think your efforts in the community, and we got about 2.5 minutes, were appreciated or are appreciated even today? Do you think because you've got a lot of criticism from other black people, black leaders, about what you're doing. Some people say you're grandstanding. Some people say being from Detroit, you're not one of us in the sense that not a local person, brought up in the neighborhood. What's your view on that? Not so much the criticism, but the people who you believe you've helped.
Well, I think it really did have a positive effect on people. Even to this day, there's very few places I can go in Greater Hartford without somebody recognizing me or thanking me for something that I've done. So I think that what we did showed people that they could come together and make systemic change. And it also gave other people ideas that allowed them to do things in the community. Mothers Against Violence actually grew out of something that we were doing. And there are other people also that are doing things based on what we did. And as for the criticism, anytime you step out and do what's right, you're going to get criticized. I think one of the reasons I got criticized so much was because the other people didn't have the heart or the intellect to do what I did and hold it all together.
Well, the other thing I'm thinking of is very few people that I remembered or know of even today are willing to physically put themselves on the line like that, because of the fear of harm and that kind of thing. So,
well, see, all organisms die, all organisms get injured. So for people to say, I can't do this because I might get injured or I might die, to me is a ridiculous argument. I mean, the most important thing is human beings and the community must be made safe. So if you're going to stand for something, you have to understand when you do that, you might wind up behind the 8 ball, so to speak. And I understood that clearly.
I don't want to hang around with you anymore then. If that's your philosophy, I don't want to be part of that, because I want to live to see my grandchildren. I want to, see my daughter walk down that aisle, but I'm just kidding. Anyway, we'll be right back with Cornell Lewis. Stay with us. Give us a few more minutes. Hi, I'm John Mason. We're back with Cornell Lewis. Cornell, thanks again.
Thank you.
We're gonna play a little game here.
Okay.
I'm gonna be Clippers owner Donald Sterling. You're gonna be yourself.
Okay.
And I just want you to react to, you just heard the report of last week, and what would you say to me if you saw me sitting in a Dunkin' Donuts and you happened to come up to me, and here I am at Dunkin' Donuts with my, well, not my wife anymore, but I'm just sitting here. What would you say to me?
Well, I would want to know, Mr. Sterling, about the comments you made. It's interesting that you would say that you had a problem with your girlfriend at the time, or your former girlfriend, hanging around black people. And it's interesting because she's partly black and Mexican. So you didn't have a problem with her as your girlfriend, but you have a problem with her hanging around black males. That's number one. And number two, your comments, I don't know if you understand this or not, but they're offensive to a large majority of people in the black community. So, Mr. Sterling, for you to make those comments and then talk about your basketball players as if they're some kind of property, reminds me of the things I used to read about plantations in the South when slavery was legal in the South.
You're not going to make me give up my team, are you?
Well, I think that you have to, Mr. Sterling, divest yourself of that team given the comments that came out of your mouth. Now, in all honesty, you have the right to feel any way you want to.
Yeah.
But when your thoughts and your words go out into the public domain and you have the power over people economically, so to speak, then, that whole dynamic needs to change. You can't feel that way and own a team that has a majority of black players, because if you feel that way and think that way, that's going to be acted out in some way.
Okay, all right. Done. I learned my lesson. Let's move on. But so I'm back to being the host. But you have made that comparison about slave owner, white. I don't know. What's the word? Not slave owner. A slave owner. But I mean, even today, you've compared certain situations to that. I mean, it's not that extreme. But I mean, you're saying like, Donald Sterling having all black players, and other people have said that the NBA has kind of sometimes, or any sport where there's all blacks as the athletes, with a white owner, you can perceive it that way. But you don't really see it that way, do you? Or do you? Do you see like someone making $20 million a real slave? Yeah.
There are different kinds of slavery. At one time, black people picked cotton, and that helped master, to enrich his financial base. Now we have black players running footballs and throwing footballs. We have black players bouncing the basketball. We have them engaging in boxing. And in a way, they're high-paid athletes, but they're enriching the financial coffers of people who feel like Donald Sterling. So whether you're picking cotton for a biscuit and a piece of chicken at the end of the day, or you're bouncing a basketball or throwing a football for $20 million a year, or like the young man for the Seattle Seahawks just signed a 4-year contract.
Richard Sherman.
Yeah, Richard Sherman for $57 million a year. It doesn't make any difference how much you earn if the person who owns the franchise is making money off of you and you're performing just like a slave.
Okay, so let me say this. Where does it end for you? In other words, do you always see things in a racial perspective? Being black, is it
Not
more?
really.
No.
No.
So I mean, could it be, the guy just happens to be white and the athlete is black and that's the end of it, or?
Well, as it pertains to Donald Sterling, he said some things, and he didn't just say that. I remember growing up, and Elgin Baylor had problems with him.
Right.
And people had been saying
I think Elgin Baylor said something along those lines. That
Elgin Baylor had problems with him for years when I was growing up. But I mean, if your thoughts and your words become known, and it is clearly perceived that you feel that way, then that's when I make the distinction. I cannot say that all white people, are like Donald Sterling. That's crazy. I've worked with too many of them.
Yeah.
I mean, I've done activist things with a lot of white people. And so that argument that all white people are like Donald Sterling is stupid. However, but when you make your thoughts and your words known, and it's clearly perceived that you have not only a prejudice, but you discriminate against people of color in some way, then that's when I make the distinction. You have to. Nobody becomes my enemy unless they manifest themselves in some way. So when I see you, I just see Johnny Mason, a guy I know. You just happen to be white, and all the time I've known you, you've never ever let me know that you have any kind of negative feelings towards people of color. Some other whites I run into, you pick up on it, they won't say it, but they feel that way. And that is why, I put a blog together called DCF Plantation, to show that people that run the Department of Children and Families in Connecticut, are similar to Donald Sterling. The only difference is Donald Sterling did it with words, and the Department of Children and Families, they do it with policy and procedure.
Okay, we're going to get to that in a minute, but I want to get back to, you had mentioned, you were talking to someone earlier about McDonald's and wages. And what exactly are you working with as far as that goes?
I'm working with a group of people who are trying to get workers at McDonald's, Wendy's, Dunkin' Donuts, and places like that to earn a decent living. And so we've been going around to different fast food places in Connecticut protesting outside and inside to let management know that they need to pay their workers a living wage. And I think that is something that needs to, be out there in the community and expressed.
Let me ask you this. Is that confrontation work? It seems kind of like Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton, in the sense that calling people to the mat. Some people would criticize that you're strong-arming them.
That's the great American way.
Strong arming?
Strong arming, yeah. The leaders in America are always strong armed.
Yeah, but you're black, and it's no. I'm just kidding. So that's how the best policy. Instead of calling and saying, "Can we talk to you? Can we sit down?" That's not going to work.
The fast food fight happens on many fronts. You have people that are talking to management. You have people that are doing activism in the streets. Yesterday, when I went to a McDonald's in Bloomfield and a Wendy's, and we protested outside and inside, we had people from France who work at McDonald's in France who were flown over here to be part of the protest. They successfully engineered a pay raise of about $14 an hour, I think, over in France.
Yeah.
And so you have to fight on many fronts. I believe in the old adage, talk, fight, talk. So we're in the boardroom and we're talking. That's one form of fighting, words. Right. And then while you're still talking, you know, you got action going out in the streets. All of that brings pressure to bear.
Let me ask you about Al Sharpton and your views on him and you know, how he's kind of through the years transformed himself. Yeah. What's your feelings on Mr. Sharpton?
Well, it's kind of interesting because I remember Brother Al when he used to wear pink jumpsuits and he was in need of a hairdresser, you know, and he'd walk around with a megaphone hollering at Koreans and things like that. Now looking at him, his transformation, it's kind of interesting to notice how he's transformed himself into a national figure. I still think that in some cases when things are going on in the black community, he needs to take a back seat, like the whole.
He's not representative of the black community as he once was.
Well, I mean, okay, the incident with Trayvon Martin, he was down there, him and Jesse Jackson. I felt they could have backed up a little bit and let some other people take center stage. Every time I looked at the TV or opened a newspaper or looked at social media, there was Al Sharpton and Jesse talking before thousands of people, and that's fine. But there were other people, I'm quite sure, just as capable, and that's the only problem I have with Al Sharpton and Jesse at times. They keep staying in the spotlight, and they need to let somebody else with different tactics move up.
Is Jesse Jackson, his time past?
Well, I don't know if his time has passed. I think, you know, he did a lot of good things as I was growing up as a teenager in the 60s and 70s. I think occasionally maybe he needs to get out there and proclaim certain things that he holds as true. But I think he needs to take another avenue. Like me, for instance, I taught community organizing. What I learned in organizing on Bellevue Street, I used to teach that at Capital Community College and show people how you can organize different segments of the community and bring them together.
How about your role models?
My role models?
Yeah, either growing up or even now. Who inspires you? And don't go into that Greek mythology stuff.
I
don't want to hear about Socrates.
Okay. I'll be honest about it. I grew up idolizing certain people. One man built rocket ships, and I wanted to be like him, and I told my parents I wanted to build rocket ships. A man named Werner von Braun. I didn't know that he was a Nazi at the time. I just knew he built rocket ships. So I told my dad I wanted to build V1 buzz bombs and V2 buzz bombs like Werner von Braun. So he's one of my heroes, and I still have a picture of him.
As far as community activism, though, as far
activism,
as, you know, your life, you know, like fighting for causes and justice and stuff?
Well, a lot of different people. I mean, you have to look at people like Medgar Evers, who gave his life for what he believed. You have to look at black women, you know, Ida B. Wells, who wrote a book, I think it was 100 Years of Lynching. Different people, Asa Philip Randolph, the man who started the Pullman Brotherhood Union. It took him about 10 or 12 years to pull that together and face a tremendous odds.
Your father have an influence in your life at all as far as?
Yeah, I think he had an influence in my life. I mean, he worked at a factory and he was a union man. So he used to take me to union meetings. And that's when I first saw the power of people coming together. Back then, they used to have crates of tomatoes in the back soft tomatoes, so if they didn't like the speaker,
wow,
they would throw the tomatoes. And so and so when the tomatoes were flying, I would always say, "Daddy, can we wait?" And he would pick me up and say, "No, son, let's go." Yeah. Tomatoes would be flying at the speaker, and they say, "Sit down, you bum." You know, but yeah, he was an influence as a man.
How about your mom?
Yeah, mom was, she was an influence. She always took care of me and made sure that I ate, I was clean, I went to school. And she served many functions. She always told me I was her boy, and she used to take her finger and stick it in my dimple and say, "My handsome man." And then when I was out there fighting, trying to beat somebody to death at 5 or 6 years old, she'd run out and pick me up. I'm kicking and still swinging, and she'd take me in the house and calm me down. So she was something. She used to say, "Boy, you're too sensitive. You're reading 1 minute, and then you're out there fighting like Joe Lewis the next minute." And she couldn't make sense of the contradiction. You know, because I sit there all day, and she said, "You're reading again?" I said, "Mm-hmm."
Hey, we got like less than a minute.
Okay.
Just tell me what's your let's see, how can we end the last third? What's on your mind? Like, give me like a minute of what you think is important for people to do, you know, in Hartford and
well, I think what's important for people to do is to understand that when you're fighting against an opponent or you're trying to make systemic change, it's not going to occur overnight. One rally, 2 rallies, that's not going to change people that have been in power for years and years. If you want something, you're going to have to fight consistently, and my motto is no give, no take, no compromise. And that's what I live by. So if you're going to fight, remember, you have to go in there and fight long, hard, and often in order to make change. And along the way, you may take some lumps. If you're not ready to get out there on that battlefield, then you might as well stay back in the background. Nothing wrong with staying back there, but if you step out there on that battlefield, you better be ready for what's going on.
Cornell, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Great.